Mark Caro, and welcome to episode 45 of Caropop. Drummer Gilson Lavis was the longest-lasting member of the British band Squeeze, other than singer-songwriters Glenn Tilbrook and Chris Difford, and he powered the bulk of their best songs. From the galloping beat of the debut single Take Me I'm Yours onward, Lavis brought finesse, muscle, and a keen sense of groove to Difford and Tilbrook's melodic songs. He also was a powerful presence live. Lavis already had toured with Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Dolly Parton, and has stories about all three by the time he answered a classified ad for a band seeking a drummer. How did Lavis overwhelm the Squeeze guys to get the gig? He also discusses the band's creative process, how Difford, who wrote the lyrics, and Tilbrook, who wrote the music, presented the songs, and how Lavis, the band's most experienced musician, played a key role in arranging them early on. How did John Cale of the Velvet Underground come to produce Squeeze's self-titled debut album? How was that fit? John Wood, who had produced Richard and Linda Thompson, worked with Squeeze on their next two albums, Cool for Cats and Argy Bargy. The former featured the singles Cool for Cats, which has an interesting origin story, and Up the Junction. Lavis said certain band members argued for a different song to be chosen as a single instead of Up the Junction, which of course is one of Squeeze's best songs. Argy Bargy represented another leap forward, bursting out of the gate with Pulling Mussels from the Shell and Another Nail in My Heart, both of which may inspire air drumming as you listen to Lavis's work. The pinnacle was 1981's East Side Story, produced by Elvis Costello and Roger Basharian, aside from the Driving in Quintessence, which Dave Edmunds produced. The original plan was for a double album in which Costello, Edmunds, Nick Lowe, and Paul McCartney each would have produced a side. Why didn't that happen? By this time, extroverted keyboardist Jools Holland had left, replaced by Paul Carrack, who had sung Ace's hit How Long and also played with Roxy Music. How did the band change at that point? Carrack took the lead vocal on Tempted and knocked it out of the park. Did it bother Tilbrook that he didn't sing what became the band's signature song? How did that arrangement with Lavis's steady beat come to be? How did the band's dynamic change when Difford and Tilbrook started being compared to Lennon and McCartney? Was the Beatles connection too much when Squeeze hired Beatles engineer Phil McDonald to co-produce the follow-up, Sweets from a Stranger? What was it like having yet another keyboardist, Don Snow, in the band? Why was that album considered such a letdown despite many high points? Was Lavis one of the bandmates who thought Black Coffee in Bed should be played faster? After the one-off single, Annie Get Your Gun, this version of Squeeze broke up. By then, as Lavis tells it, his drinking had become so much of a problem that he likely would have been out even if Difford and Tilbrook hadn't decided to make a go of it as a duo. Lavis got sober, drove a cab, and was back in playing shape when the band reformed a few years later, with Jools Holland also in the fold. This Squeeze incarnation scored its biggest hit, Hourglass, but the dynamics were different, and Lavis explains how. Lavis stayed clean for several years and 4 post-reunion albums before he started drinking again, and as he tells it, was kicked out of the band again. This time when he became sober, it stuck, and he has been playing with his old bandmate in the Jools Holland Rhythm and Blues Orchestra for many years. He also has become an in-demand portrait painter, depicting musicians with whom he has played, such as Amy Winehouse, Smokey Robinson, and Lily Allen. What happened when the MTV show Bands Reunited tried to get Lavis and Holland to rejoin Difford and Tilbrook? Could he envision ever playing with Squeeze again? Gilson Lavis has made much great music and learned a lot over a long, action-packed career. We're lucky to have him sharing his experiences and insights on Caropop. Thank you for doing this. Wonderful to talk to you.
My pleasure.
What are you doing more of these days, drumming or painting?
Well, I'm doing both, actually. If I have any problems, it's I haven't got enough time because I'm still very busy as a drummer. But
right.
It's all good, it's all good.
How active is Jools Holland's Rhythm and Blues Orchestra right now?
Oh, non-stop, really. Yeah, we've just finished a run of shows through the spring and autumn, which was about 50 or 60 shows, quite a few back-to-back, which was okay. It was good to get back in the saddle because, as you can imagine, it's been pretty quiet, relatively quiet, for a few years with this COVID insanity, really. But although we did get back on the road somewhat last year, we managed to do some of the end part of the summer tour and the winter tour. but it's still been difficult. But no, we've been quite very busy this year. In fact, we finished with a special gig at the, they're all special, but a particularly special gig at the Royal Albert Hall in London, which was a benefit for prostate cancer, to cure it, not to get it, of course. And it was great because I was there on stage playing drums with everybody they wheeled out in front of me, and Paul Weller and all sorts of, big names. In this side of the pond, I don't know about America, but it was a great show to do. So, and that just finished, which was the last thing we did on that spring and summer tour. Now I've got a day or two, well, I've got a couple of weeks off, and then Jools and myself, we go out as a duo, because that's how the Rhythm and Blues started, the whole thing, how the orchestra started with Jools and myself going out as a duo, and occasionally we still do it. We go out as a duo and play, wherever we get invited to. And we got a tour, we got a run of shows coming up soon, the end of this month and during next month. Then there's another couple of weeks off, and then it all starts again with the autumn and winter tour, and we're playing right the way through till Christmas. So a lot of stuff, it's good.
Have you played with Jools Holland's Rhythm and Blues Orchestra longer or done more shows than you did with Squeeze?
I think I probably have, yes. Well, Jools and I, it started out, as I said, as a duo, and that started over 30 years ago. That was something like 35 years ago. So, and I think Squeeze in its entirety ran for about 20-something years. I think, I don't know. I haven't added it up really, Mark.
Yeah, it depends how you count it because there's some offs and ons.
So, but yes, I mean, Squeeze, of course, is still going in the Chris and Glenn format. So, but with my input with Squeeze, I would say on and off about 20 years. I grew up in Bedford, and then my later years, well, I say later years, from about 7 to leaving home at 15, I lived in Luton. But no, Squeeze were formed and grew from an embryo to a band in South London, around Deptford and Greenwich, yeah.
Right. So how did you first pick up the drums?
Well, the school band, this is, the secondary school band, because I was at secondary school. They had about 6 or 7 lead guitarists, but no drummer. And I really wanted to be in the band because I thought it would stand me in good stead with the girls. Well, I've got to say it never did, really. But I did get the job of being a drummer, but I didn't have a drum kit. All I had was a tambourine with the jingles cut off and a couple of my mum's knitting needles. But it got me the job. And then for the following Christmas, this was when I was about 13, my mum and dad bought me a bass drum and a snare drum and a ride cymbal. And so, so it's all their fault, really.
Were there drummers who you especially idolized at that point? Well,
I suppose once I started to hit that tambourine, something happened. I started to get a real interest in drums and drumming. And there were certain drummers that I saw on the television, which was pretty limited in those days. There was the drummer from the Hollies, Bobby Elliott, that was a really good top-class pop drummer that used to do a lot of flashy stuff with his sticks. And I really fancied that, being rather shallow as a human being. I really fancied that as a young man. And then there were other drummers. The American drummer I really liked, what was his name? Dino Diletti. And he was fantastic and very good looking too. So I found that very impressive. And then there were other drummers, of course, like Keith Moon, British rock drummer that really rated, and Led Zeppelin, you know, all that stuff that was just mind-boggling. But also, I really enjoyed big band. I was getting into big band drums. People like Gene Krupa, Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson. And actually, in my time, I met two of those. I never met Gene Krupa, unfortunately. But I met Buddy Rich in New York, and I actually played drums with Louis Bellson, which was a real honour. So there we go. And this was when I was in my sort of formative years of about 13, 14, 15.
It seemed like you always had a really nice sense of groove, and I was sort of wondering if, you know, you also sort of picked up on some of those soul drummers, like, you know, like Al Jackson from Stax, or, you know, Booker T and the MGs and stuff. Because I mean, you know, you're playing on in Quintessence, and that's kind of like a souped up Time Is Tight thing a little bit. But it makes you, you know, you really want to get moving to that one. That's the one that, you know, my daughter's like, every time that comes on, they just crank it up.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, well, that's true too. I mean, I was just picking names out of a hat, to be honest. But yes, of course, all those fantastic drummers, you know. I was really influenced by American music, of course, by that whole wave of soul music and blues music, and so yeah, all that influenced me. In fact, I through my rather speckled career, I played with lots of different styles of music too. I was in a funk band, I was in a soul band, I was in a country band, I was in a big band, I was in, you know, all sorts of things. And I think that's one of the things that has really helped me in my latter years working with Jools, is because we play with so many different people and different styles of music.
Right.
It's not like I've had to learn how to do it, because I was doing it first time round. I'm that old, but I was doing it when it sort of started, you know. So, yeah, so it's all good. It's all good, Mark, you know.
Well, I'd read that before you were in Squeeze, you had toured with Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Dolly Parton.
Yeah, and Tony Burnett and Jerry Lee. I was a pickup drummer. What that meant, I don't know if you're aware of this. You probably are. But there was a certain time in musical history when, because of unions, you know, the American Union and the British Union, American artists could only bring over with them a certain amount of musicians,
right?
And it was reciprocated the other way too. So British artists going to America only could take a certain amount of musicians. Well, there wasn't much traffic going America's way, because any bands going or anything going that way tended to be the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Mersey Beats and all those sort of, and they were bands. But artists that were coming over this way tended to be sometimes, not all the time, tended to be individuals like Dolly Parton, like Jerry Lee, like Chuck Berry and Dolly Parton. And so they would bring over usually an MD who was also a keyboard player, usually piano, and maybe a guitarist or sometimes a drummer where I wasn't needed, but, you know, a bass player. And then they'd pick up the rest of the band. And I was lucky enough to be one of the musicians that was used as a pickup drummer. Also, I worked with an agency called, it was Mervyn Conn Agency. Ended up having a bit of a unfortunate reputation, did our Mervyn, but no need to go into that. And he used to bring in quite a lot of American artists. And it was through Mervyn that I got to work with Chuck and with Jerry Lee and the like. Also, he used to put on the country music festival. Was it festival or show? Anyway, at Wembley. And I was the house drummer on that, which is where I worked with Dolly Parton and Tammy Wynette and all those various people, because I was the house drummer. And Also, it went on tour, that particular show. So it would go off around Europe, Scandinavia, and I'd be sitting in the back of the bus. In fact, I remember sitting in the back of the bus with Dolly Parton on one trip and with Tammy Wynette on another trip, talking about life, talking about drinking, because I'm a recovering alcoholic. And I was a bit of a drinker in those days too. So myself and a few of those artists had quite a bit in common.
Dolly Parton seems like she would be very pleasant to be around, and that it might be kind of challenging to be in Chuck Berry's or Jerry Lee Lewis's band. Was that true?
Well, it was very different. With Chuck Berry, I got on very well, although he's definitely a difficult musician, difficult chap to get on with. I don't suppose I ever got on with him, but well, you see, during that Chuck Berry time, I was in a relationship with his daughter, Ingrid, and now we're getting into rather strange territory. So I was traveling with Chuck, and I was staying in the same hotels as Chuck, and me and Ingrid were all the best of friends. So you know, I saw it from maybe a slightly different point of view, although I toured with him for 3 or 4 years. So it wasn't constantly like that. I mean, the first tour, Ingrid didn't come over with him. It was only on the second tour. So the first tour, yeah, I remember. Well, we were playing an Enormo Dome in France, Lyon or something. And a big thing, you know, big, several thousand, you know, God knows how many. It seemed an awfully big gig to me then. I mean, I've played bigger since, but then it was, oh my word. And the previous night, unbeknownst to myself or anybody else, the tour manager, who was a rather strident, opinionated, bit of a dickhead really, had thrown out Chuck Berry's the head of Chuck Berry's European fan club. And he didn't know who he was, and he just ushered him out the stage door and told him to be away with himself, you know. Anyway, this, of course, ticked Chuck off quite a bit. So this next night we were playing Lyon, and I'm standing at the side of the stage, and Chuck is standing right next to me, like this, holding his guitar, you know, as he did, looking up at the sky. And I don't know if you know this about Chuck, but he always got paid before he went on stage.
Right, in cash.
He got half the money before he left America, and then the half of every gig he got in his back pocket before he walked on stage. And so I'm standing there right next to Chuck, and the announcer, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chuck Berry. And Chuck didn't move, and it just didn't move at all. And it all went really sort of quiet, and the audience is cheering. And the bloke said again, ladies and gentlemen, Chuck Berry. And of course, Chuck didn't move. And so the tour manager in a panic came up to Chuck and said, what's going on? You've been announced, get on there. He said, I get paid in dollars, not in francs. Well, it's the same thing. We can change it in the morning. No, the contract says I get paid in dollars. Oh, okay. So Chuck put his hand in his pocket and he took out this huge wad of francs and gave it to the tour manager and said, I want my money in dollars. It's in the contract. That tour manager had to get in his car, drive into downtown Lyon, get a bank manager to open up and his bank, change the money into dollars, drive back to the gig and give the money to Chuck. And all the time, Chuck just stood there like that, looking at the ceiling. And I'm standing next to him, shitting bricks. I'm going, oh no. You know, because this was just, the tension was palpable because the audience by then had gone from cheering to booing. I mean, they were raw. They were getting really, really, really uncomfortable and angry. It was getting serious, you know. There were fights starting, and it was just, oh, lordy, you know. And it must have been at least 20 minutes, half an hour, just, and Chuck didn't move. He just, shh. And I'm standing next to him with a pair of drumsticks. And he was really nervous.
The fact that they'd already introduced him, you know, gets everyone going. It's one thing when it takes a long time for the act to come on anyway, but when they introduce the guy twice and then he's just standing there.
I know. And then in the end, he got the money and he just walked out on stage. And of course, the place was a mixture of cheers and boos. And then, but as soon as he started to play, and well, actually, it didn't, because I don't know if you know this about Chuck. In those days, Chuck always wanted to be a crooner, but of course, he was a rock and roll. It's strange, isn't it, how people have success in one area, but they crave to have success in another area too. Anyway, he really wanted to be a crooner. So what he would do quite often, almost every night, he'd come out and he'd go into far too many verses of Ramblin' Rose. Well, is that Chuck Berry? And he'd come out and he'd go, boom, clank, boom, clank, boom, clank, Ramblin' Rose, clank, boom, clank, boom, clank, Ramblin' Rose. And he'd do this, and it'd go on and on and on and on. And the audience at first would just be cheering, you know, because it's Chuck. And then it'd start to get a bit uncomfortable. And then they started to really get angry.
Would you, as the drummer, know what he was planning to do?
He did it most nights, at least for one of those tours, if not two. But then, of course, when the audience had almost reached a peak of irritation, he'd go, and that'll all kick off and it'll be great. But you got to remember, I was about 17, you know, and this is, you know, good God, you know.
Well, he would have made an interesting father-in-law.
Oh, dear, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Ingrid was lovely. She was such a sweet girl, so innocent as well, really. But I believe she was happily married and settled down and stuff. But yeah, they were interesting days.
And then and Jerry Lee Lewis, was he that colorful as well?
I don't know, because he was very he was a serious drinker. Serious drinker. And I don't think through that whole tour, and it was only in the UK I worked with him, and it was only, I don't know how many dates. I didn't sing that many, 16 maybe dates. I don't think he ever knew my name. He would just sort of, he'd be announced and then he'd be taken to the side of the stage and just sort of pushed on, and he'd go on and play. But he was great and the audience loved him, you know. But he was seriously handicapped by alcohol at the time, you know. And once again, he went through not the same thing, but a similar thing, because it seemed that he really wanted to be a country artist. So he would sit down at the piano and then start playing country things, you know. And that would wind the audience up. And then, of course, he'd go into Great Balls of Fire, and that'd be the end of that, you know.
Right. So what was your first impression of Glenn Tilbrook and Chris Difford, and how did that, that part of your life and career happen?
I had a music shop in South London, not in South London, in Southend, with several other musicians that I worked with for many years. In fact, some of them have been doing that pick-up musician stuff with me, you know, so I knew them quite well. and they were from Southend. So, and I was living down there at the time, and we opened a music shop, more out of optimism than anything else. And it was a short time later, we ran into financial trouble with. It was doing okay, but then the then Prime Minister Ted Heath got into a bit of a fracas with the miners, or with somebody else, I can't remember. And the country got into really dire situation, and he put the whole country on a 3-day working week. And of course, there was no money. Nobody had any money to do anything, and it got really quite dire. And the shop stopped trading it when it went bankrupt. And I even lost my drum kit because by then we had no financial support, and I put my own drum kit in the window to make it look like we still were a music shop. But it didn't work. And when the bailiffs come, they seized my drum kit. So I didn't even have a drum kit. So I was pretty washed up as a drummer. And I had no money, of course, and touring had stopped, and it was already crazy. So I went home to live with my mother because my father had died. This is a long-winded explanation, but this is how it happened. My father had died, 6 months earlier. Died of a heart attack. And
sorry to hear that.
Well, it's a long while ago now, but thank you. In fact, he died when I was just about to go on stage with the Springfields. And he died in hospital. And the manager of the Chelmsford, whatever it was, theatre, he came backstage into the dressing room just before we went on stage and said, "Gilson, I've got some bad news. We just heard your father's died." Gave me a large whiskey and said, "Have a good show."
Oh my God.
You know, oh dear. Anyway, oh God. Showbiz. Quick showbiz, me, never. Anyway, so there I was. I went home. No, I went to live with my mum. No drum kit, no anything. And I got a job in I've always worked, even when I haven't been drumming, I'll be doing something. And I got a job stacking bricks in a brickyard in the London brick company that make bricks, building bricks, red bricks. And I was working in the kilns after they'd been fired, stacking them and putting them into stacks so that a forklift truck could pick them up and put them on a lorry. And God, that was tough work, bending over all day. I was using rubber things cut out of inner tubes on my hands to pick up these bricks. And after trying to earn some money, and after doing this for about 6 months, my hands were in this permanent sort of claw shape. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be a drummer, this really isn't the best move, So I went to my long-suffering mum, God bless her, and I said, no, I can't do this anymore. I need to get back to playing the drums, but I need a drum kit. And God bless her cotton socks. She bought me a drum kit out of my dad's insurance money when he died. And she asked me what kit I wanted. And of course, being a complete dickhead and an arsehole, I chose a Ludwig Octoplus kit, which is just ridiculous, huge drum kit with 8 single-headed tom-toms and double bass drum. Oh, God, crazy. But, I was a nutcase in those days. There's no excuse, I suppose, but I was a nutcase. And so I started to practice a bit in my mum's front room on this huge, great, and she lived in a bungalow, a single-story little thing in Bedford. And I was playing on this huge kit, and I was slowly getting my chops together again, And then there was this little advert in the Melody Maker, which is a music paper in England.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a tiny little advert. It wasn't even a box ad. It was just a little ad. South London band looking for a drummer. South London band with manager looking for a drummer.
No description of the music or anything.
No, just that. So I phoned up and I got an audition. So I took the front passenger seat out of my mum's Mini, and I put all this drum kit in there, and I drove down to London, which is about sort of 70 miles from Bedford. Drove down to South London, and there they were in this underground room in a swimming pool in Greenwich, and there was Jools, and there was Glenn, Chris, and Harry Cooley all in there, and I started bringing this huge drum kit and set it up, which took up about half the room, this great big thing. And I think they'd been auditioning quite a few drummers, but I think I was the first one to actually turn up with a seriously big drum kit and able to play a bit, actually be able to play the drums, because I've been a professional drummer for 10 years already, So I got the job, and little did they know how little I knew, and so that's how I got the job. And we started to play South London pubs and clubs, and I got paid £15 a week. And Miles Copeland was the manager, and after about a couple of years of that, no less than that, we made our first record, which was Packet of Three, and in fact, if you look at really, really early photos of Squeeze, you'll see all the band, apart from me, look quite sort of street cred. I still look like a cabaret artist. Yeah, and a smart jacket, because that's all I'd ever done.
And then that first album was produced by John Cale, which was an interesting combination.
Yeah. Well, I think the manager, Miles Copeland, he was interesting chap. I mean, been a millionaire and broke 3 or 4 times, up and down. And he was very incisive in a lot of ways, and street credibility was one of the ways that he was very intuitive. And I think he realised that a new band that had a producer of the ilk of Velvet Underground, that hugely credible band, would do nothing but help us. I mean, it certainly wouldn't be a hindrance. And it did. I mean, he was an interesting chap. I've worked with him since, actually. Not that long ago, a few years ago, he came on the telly when we were doing one of these New Year's Eve special things we do every year. And he came on as one of the guests. So I've met him since. But he was really quite radical, In fact, he got slightly annoyed with my drumming because it was a bit too, what was the word he used? It was a bit too professional. It was a bit too technically proficient for him. So what he got me to do...
You were no Mo Tucker.
Yeah, absolutely. So what he got me to do is he taped 2 drumsticks in each of my hands. So I had 4 sticks, and he gaffer taped them in place. So now I'm playing like this with 4 sticks around the kit, hopefully to make me sound like, I don't know, I just bought the drum kit maybe, I don't know. But that's, it was lunatic really. But it was really invented too.
Did he get on with the band? Like were Difford and Tilbrook sort of pleased with whatever he was doing as a producer?
Yeah, I think so. I think he was. Yeah, he did. Yeah, I think we all got on with him. He was a good lad. He was very interesting. He was very. God, it's a long time ago now, mate. I mean, we're going back to when I was 25. For fuck's sake.
Right.
But he was an incredibly interesting chap. It was John that suggested to Chris that he stop writing lyrics, lovey-dovey lyrics, and start writing about things that were in his life that he had to experience of. And that really opened a door to Chris, because then his his lyric writing really turned a corner.
Right.
Started to write, truly amazing lyrics, individual lyrics, remarkable lyrics, really. I'm still amazed by them. One of his lyrics would encapsulate someone's life from birth to death. And he'd managed to do it in 3 minutes. And then he'd also managed to write a lyric that was about 1 second in time and make it last 3 minutes.
Right.
So just that sort of level of imagination, really remarkable stuff,
So would the two of them come to you with sort of a finished demo of a song? I know that Chris would write the lyrics, Glenn would write the music, and then I guess you all would get the song at that point?
Well, yes and no. In the early days, it was Glenn just playing an acoustic guitar acoustic, singing some lyrics. He did have the melody, more or less, though it did change. And then the band would arrange it. In fact, in those early days, I did a lot of the arranging because I'd had quite a bit more experience with working in the music industry than anybody else in Squeeze. And I've always had a pretty reasonable ear for music, what works and what doesn't. So I was actually probably the main arranger of Squeeze songs for the first 2, maybe even 3 albums.
Huh.
But then the longer we went on, the more defined Glenn's demos became, and the more we as a band tried to, or it became required that we almost emulate the demos rather than create something different, and that made it a bit harder, actually.
So Take Me, I'm Yours was that was off the first album, and it was kind of the first hit, the first single that a lot of people know. And it's really kind of driven by that drum part. Like that beat is very distinct in it, that kind of galloping thing. Is that something you came up with when they presented the demo, or was that there to begin with?
Well, yeah, it was. It was, what had happened, we'd done an album.
Yeah, it was called UK Squeeze Here.
Yeah, UK Squeeze, yeah, that's right. It's, what happened was that we delivered the album and A&M Records didn't think there was a single on it. Although they loved the album, they didn't think there was a single. So they sent us in the studio to deliberately record a single. And Glenn had this Take Me, I'm Yours track. And so it started with this really old, I'll say now it's old, but then it was probably quite new, this drum machine with buttons on the front. You just press. That sort of really basic drum pattern thing. And so they put down this sort of, the start of this track with this real basic thing on it. And then they asked me to go and put some drums on. So that's when I went out there and did that. That sort of cross between a tango and I don't know what. I was going to say Talking Heads, but actually that Talking Heads came later, so it wasn't like Talking Heads. But anyway, you know what I mean.
Right. And I know a Talking Head song you're talking about too, because it starts off more songs about buildings and food. Thank you for sending me an angel. Yeah, no, you had the galloping thing first.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So I did that. I'm responsible.
So, and then Cool for Cats was the second album, and John Wood produced that, and Argy Bargy. You guys went through a lot of producers, I noticed, but John Wood's someone who I know from, I mean, it was sort of in retrospect because I didn't know when it was coming out, but he'd produced those early Richard and Linda Thompson albums like I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. And then he was working with you guys. Did he have a different, influence on your music, or was it He just sort of, helping you guys along, and you guys were discovering it on your own?
No, I think by then we were actually more or less sort of producing ourselves with maybe John Wood having the casting vote would best describe it. So yeah, I think we were sort of producing ourselves. But when we came back after that break, when Squeeze disbanded and
right
went off and did their own thing. When we came back, that's when we started to use producers, because I think producers then had become rather hip. Having a hip producer became the thing to have, So I think we were once again pushed into that by the record company.
Yeah, I think that Cool for Cats and Argy Bargy are both produced by John Wood and Squeeze, or by Squeeze and John Wood. So, and those albums don't sound particularly similar either, because Cool for Cats is a little more sort of synthy electronic stuff going on, and then Argy Bargy is more kind of straight ahead guitar, piano.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I don't why this is, maybe because we'd spent a long time touring. In those early days, we were virgins, more or less. So we'd made an EP, and then we made that album, and then we did Cool for Cats, and then we toured. We toured and toured and toured. So I think we got used to playing as a unit rather than playing in a studio.
Right.
Until then, the balance between live work and studio, it was quite a lot of studio and not a huge amount of live. Well, there was a lot, but not. But then we toured and toured and toured and did endless tours of America and Australia and Europe, and we really toured the arse out of it. We played hundreds and hundreds of live shows. So I think that's reflected maybe in the actual sound of the band and how we worked as a band.
When they were coming in with the songs for Cool for Cats, did you think, oh, these guys are getting a lot better? And the same thing for Argy Bargy.
Did I think that? I'm not sure I ever did. No, I just dealt with what was in front of me. I was still a drinker in those days, so I was taking everything on life. I was taking on surface values. I was I was a relatively shallow human being, I suppose. But what I could do was play the drums and put on a show and have some musical nous about me. But every other part of my character was drenched in alcohol, So, no, I mean, I can't honestly say I thought about anything much. And any thoughts I had were usually, how do I get out of that last mess? Or how do I say sorry for that catastrophe? Or, oh shit, have I got to apologise to today? So that was sort of what was going on in those days. But my God, I was a pretty good drummer. I was very good live as well.
Absolutely.
It was real energy and show and all sorts of stuff going on. There was a certain je ne sais quoi going on in those days, even though I was getting towards, not then completely, it was later on, but I was edging towards being a shuffling drunk. But there was a period when I was, I was performing quite well, I'm a different person now and a different drummer.
Yeah.
But I can look back on that sometimes and think, oh, that wasn't bad, I might not have been a very productive human being, but I can now play the drums.
I have this deluxe edition of Argy Bargy, and it has a separate disc of a live concert. And yeah, you guys were a hot band. Like I've gone back and listened to that, and it sounds really, really good and energetic. And, I'm like, oh, I want to sort of go back into that show and be standing by the stage for it.
Oh, no. Yeah. Yeah, it was, we were pretty energetic. Yeah, we were good. But, things, it was just same old, really. We were our greatest asset and our worst enemy at the same time. That's showbiz.
Now, was that true? I mean, you're describing yourself as that. I mean, Chris Difford's obviously written a lot about drinking and struggles with alcohol as well. I mean, was that something that the whole band was going on, or was there sort of a split between people who were drinking a lot and people who weren't? Or
no, I think I don't think there was anybody in the band that was bothered about it. No, everybody drank, and I think I just took it to extreme, But I think the difference between me and the rest of the band is that I didn't have an off switch, whereas most of the band did, though occasionally they misplaced it.
Do you remember any songs that they brought in and you thought, oh, wow, this is a great song? Or, oh, wow, this sounds like it's a hit single or something like that?
Yeah, of course it was. Tempted was one of them. And Pulling Mussels from a Shell was another one that was just stood out. Call for Cats didn't, in particularly because it that sort of was created in the studio, really. Glenn, I think, just had an idea for a sort of melody and a chord change, and then it all happened in the studio. Even Chris wrote the lyrics in the studio. So no, that doesn't apply to that. But Up the Junction was another one that really, just with the quality of the lyrics, and the remarkable structure, because that's a song with no chorus. It's
right.
And and I remember the record company saying, because we just had a huge hit with Call for Cats, and they were saying, Up the Junction should be the next single. I remember, although it's been contested since, I'm pretty sure I remember it accurately, which is a lot of the band wanted It's Not Cricket as the next single. And even the record company was saying they want that, but it never sounded like a hit single to me. It was a quirky, interesting song that was okay. It was pretty good. But Up the Junction just really stood out as being a unique piece of artwork, really. And so I was pushing for Up the Junction. Although I've got to say, since then, in fact, Chris and Glenn have claimed that they're the ones that pushed for it, but they didn't.
Huh.
There we go.
And there's a video for Up the Junction too, where everyone's sort of miming playing the wrong instrument. So Glenn's on drums, you're like in the back on bass or guitar or something, and everyone's playing something different than they actually play on the record.
Yeah, I know. That was us just being childish. It's actually from Top of the Pops, and that was Glenn's idea, because I think he wanted to show off his drumming ability. So he sat behind my kit and I played the bass. I can't really play bass, so I mimed the bass. It was all a bit silly. In fact, in retrospect, it was a little bit cheesy, But there we go. It is what it is. But the actual the video for it, the one that was shot for it, was actually done on the same day as we did Call for Cats, and it was done in the kitchen of, was it George Harrison's house? I think it was.
Really?
Yeah, the Call for Cats was shot in the church, in the chapel in George Harrison's house, and then they wanted a video for Up the Junction, and we just moved the gear into the kitchen and then shot it in the kitchen in one take, real cobbled together. But it's got a certain charm about it that I quite like. And the two girls that were the backing singers in Call for Cats were at the back of that video making a cup of tea, which is rather nice.
Well, what were you doing at George Harrison's house?
Filming a video.
But how? How does that happen?
I think, I don't know, somebody knew George. I mean, we all knew George in the end. We worked with the Rhythm and Blues Orchestra quite a bit. In fact, the last record George recorded was with us before he passed away.
Well, I'd read somewhere that for East Side Story, the original plan was to do a double album in which you'd have 4 producers, Paul McCartney, Nick Lowe, Dave Edmunds, and Elvis Costello. Is that right? And I mean, it ended up being Edmunds producing in Quintessence and then Costello and Roger Bakurian, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, doing the rest of the album. But do you remember this grandiose plan of having, Paul McCartney and Nick Lowe and everyone do a side?
Yeah, I do remember it being discussed, but that was all that happened, really. It was just discussed. But really, it was Elvis really produced that. Elvis and Squeeze once again, So, I don't think it was ever going to... It was our idea, but nobody else... I mean, Paul McCartney never knew. I don't think we ever asked, so... So, yeah, I do remember that. But,
how did Dave Edmunds just end up producing that one song?
Because we went into a studio that Dave Edmunds used a lot to cut a track, because we were in between. I can't remember. We were in between albums, and we could do with a single or something. And so we went in the studio and did this one day's recording with Dave Edmunds. But it never got used as a single, but it did get used on the album. So it was done probably before we did the album, I should think.
And then in the meantime, John Bentley had replaced Harry Kukuli on bass. And
that
then
was quite early on, yeah.
Yeah, well, so he was on Argy Bargy, and I think John Kukuli was on Cool for Cats. Yeah. And then Jools left, and then Paul Caro came in for East Side Story.
Yeah.
How much did those changes affect the band dynamic?
It did affect it quite a bit, because Jools is a big character, and he's always been destined for great things, really. A unique person, and that was like a light on in the corner of the room, constantly burning, shining a light on things, and it was great. But when he went, of course, the light went off, but a different light came on, and that was with Paul and his incredible voice and his keyboard playing, which was much more sort of rock and pop orientated. Whereas Jools, of course, is the boogie woogie king.
Right.
So, so obviously, so they were the changes. But Paul, is a professional musician, and he really fitted in really well, I still see Paul. He's worked with us quite a bit too. And, I see Paul now and again, and we're still really good chums. I love him. He's a remarkable chap. In fact, his son now is playing drums with Paul on tour, and he's a really good drummer.
Yeah, no, he'd been an ace, so he'd sung "How Long," which was a big hit, in the U.S. I mean, I remember that on AM radio here, and then he was in Roxy Music, or playing on those albums and touring with them as well. So he came in as a very seasoned musician into Squeeze.
Yeah, he did indeed. Yeah, we were just a part of Paul's musical career. He after he left us, he went on and played with Rutherford, what's his name?
Mike Rutherford.
Mike Rutherford, yeah.
Yeah.
He was in that outfit for quite a while. And then, of course, he's solo now. So
I was in London the summer of '84, and I saw Nick Lowe in his cowboy outfit playing a bar in, I think, Putney. And Paul Carrick was the keyboard player and singing in that one as well. So, and then he had a solo album that Nick Lowe produced around then. So he was busy.
Never stopped. Still going. Never stops. Professional musician of the highest caliber. Absolutely. Yeah.
So do you remember the evolution of Tempted? Like, was it always like, here's a song, we're going to have Paul sing this one? Or how did that one come about? And was the arrangement always the arrangement that we heard? Or was that something where maybe I thought I'd heard years ago that, Elvis had suggested slowing it down, but then I haven't really found that when I've looked it up. So what's the story behind Tempted?
Well, as best I can remember, the arrangement has always been the same, but the speed was something that varied. In fact, it varied a lot on stage as well. Sometimes we played it quite fast. Other times it was slow. Sometimes it was even dirgy, I think. So, but no, the arrangement was always there. I think, it was Elvis that suggested that Paul sing it. And of course, when he sang it, it was undeniable. But I think it was, it did get up Glenn's nose a little bit retrospectively.
I've always wondered about that.
Because it was such a, is the word seminal? I don't know. It was such a, iconic is a bit strong. So if there's another.
No, it's a huge hit though. It's a lasting, it's a classic.
It's a classic, So I think Glenn would have really liked to have sung it in retrospect, but there you go. Nobody has everything they want, do they?
Yeah, no, the first side of that album is it seems very consciously like a vocal mix where you have Glenn and Chris singing in Quintessence together, and then Chris is singing Someone Else's Heart, which actually Glenn had sung on a version recorded for Argy Bargy. He says it was what happens when you get the deluxe editions and you get these outtakes.
They never asked me to sing one.
Would you have?
Yeah, I would have done. I used to be a singer way back. I couldn't do it now. Ever since I had COVID, my voice is shot and my breathing's shot. As you can hear, I keep running out of breath. Bloody COVID.
Sorry.
Well, I was really poorly. ICU. And,
oh, man.
Yeah, I was really ill. It was in the early days when there was no treatment or vaccine or anything, But there we go. But yeah, I used to be a singer. I used to go around singing, and I was the lead singer in the band for a while. So I would have sung, but nobody asked me. But I don't mind. You see, I was a bit more of a Matt Monro crooner rather than, rock and roll singer. So I never took me seriously at all. I used to sing like I dressed.
What was it like working with Elvis Costello on that album? Was he very involved in the sound of it?
Yeah, he was very involved in all of it. Yeah, he was really good. He's a very, very intelligent, musically minded chap with strong opinions and very open-minded. Yeah, it was really good. It was really good. Something I really remember about that, we were recording it, and near the end of recording was the day John Lennon was shot, and that really changed the atmosphere in the studio and in life. I think everybody was really shocked, and I think that sort of continued to the end of the album. Really, not that it affected the recordings too much, but certainly the ambience. It was such a mind thing.
So East Side Story came out. Tempted's a hit. Everyone's proclaiming Difford and Tilbrook to be the new Lennon and McCartney. There's a lot of hype around it. And then you guys went to do Sweets from a Stranger. You worked with Phil McDonald, who had engineered for the Beatles.
No.
Do you remember sort of what the thinking was on that album? And, was it like, we're going to up the ante even more? Or how did everyone approach that? It seems like that turned out to be sort of a difficult record for everyone.
It was a difficult record. I think it was one of those by this time, Glenn was definitely in control of the band, and he was controlling decisions and arrangements, and we'd probably by then really turned into yes men. And I think Glenn and probably the rest of us were influenced by his track record as an engineer. And maybe Chris and Glenn have been affected by the Lennon and McCartney stuff that were coming their way. In fact, in hindsight, it was pretty damaging because it played into their own personal idea of reality that wasn't strictly true, I think. But so I think that's what happened. And almost immediately, we started to work with him. We sort of realised it wasn't the right decision. He was so, you could almost hear when he was using a Beatles album track he worked on, using it as a reference point to a Squeeze recording. You could almost hear it. You know, it was, it became really quite sort of obvious. And
like, what was an example of that?
Oh, I can't remember now. But I remember us talking about it as a band, and Glenn making fun of it too. It was actually Glenn that pointed it out, saying you could almost reference the Beatles song he's using on this one. So no, you have to ask Glenn. But no, I couldn't tell you. But yeah, it wasn't particularly successful, and the band was finding life a bit uncomfortable. We were touring relentlessly and recording relentlessly, and I was drinking relentlessly, and Chris and Glenn were getting all sorts of offers and stuff going on. So I think the trip to the mausoleum was on the cards, you know. So I think, yeah, although Sweets from a Stranger does have some moments, I think, that are really quite good and quite memorable. But somewhere along the line, we sort of lost the plot, really. Those cheeky South London boys somehow lost their way and became rather sardonic, miserable touring musicians, just like many other miserable touring musicians.
So Paul Carrick had left after just the one album and singing the hit. And then Don Snow came in. So he had another new keyboardist. Did that change things up also?
Yeah, it did really. Yeah, John Snow was a Glenn Tilbrook idea, and it did sort of change it up. It was Don Snow reminded me of how I used to be when I first came into Squeeze. You know, after spending 10 years working as a pickup drummer, doing some session work, you know, making pop records in the studio and having a quite radical cabaret sort of experience where I'd done a lot of, you know, work putting on a suit and a bow tie and going out. And so that was who I was when I joined Squeeze. But after, you know, a year or two, I soon shed the shackles of that misconception of what music was. And I became more, I suppose, more the person I am now, but certainly a more edgy, radical and powerful musician, hopefully. Not somebody that was trying to follow in other people's tracks or emulate other people, but somebody who was trying to create music of my own, obviously with other people in the band. But I mean, you know, as a working musician, having an identity. And when John came into the band, I think he came in with that old sort of attitude that I had, which he'd been so used to playing for other people, that's what he was doing then. And he did play for Glenn. He did play what Glenn wanted, the way Glenn wanted. And but he very, very competent, you know, a good singer and a good keyboardist. Anyway, my idea of reality was getting pretty twisted by then. So yeah. I'm probably not a good judge. I don't want to cast aspersions either, because, you know, he's had a really good career and he's still working, and God bless him. He's a lovely chap too, you know. But it was that, and you asked me about the initial impression. Right. That's what it was, really.
Well, and again, it's like every album has at least one shift in personnel. Like it's very, I don't know if there are two albums of that first phase of Squeeze, which, you know, those first 5 albums where you had the same people on every album. I don't think there was one. And then, so Black Coffee in Bed, was there like a fight over Black Coffee in Bed and how fast that one should be?
Well, I'm not sure if fight's the right word, but there certainly was discussions.
Disagreement.
Yeah, disagreements maybe. It always sounded like almost like a Tamala Stack sort of song that needed a bit of energy going on. But I think it was pulled back and became more of a Reverend, what's his name? I'm bad on names, getting old.
Like Al Green?
Yeah, Al Green. It became a Reverend Al Green, who I've also worked with. I worked with all these people. Yeah.
Wow.
I worked with, Reverend Al Green. He came and did a TV show. Remarkable man, dear me.
I remember when you guys would play Black Coffee in Bed in the sort of next phase of, after the breakup and getting back together, and you played it in the faster tempo, which I honestly liked more. I always liked Black Coffee in Bed, but I never understood why it needed to be 6 minutes long, and I felt like it just needed a little more of a pick me up. But
you're right. No, you're absolutely right, and that was part of the argument. It needed editing and speeding up. It could have been, I think, an iconic track for Squeeze, because it had that lovely Difford lyric, that. What we were talking about earlier with this sort of strange take on the world,
Right. Yeah, there's some of that album I really like a lot. It's a mixed record, but I think it's almost a little underrated at this point. You have some interest in drumming on, not even but very energetic drumming on Stranger Than the Stranger on the Shore. Mm-hmm. That's got a lot going on. Points of View has that sort of soulful, not quite tempted thing happening. And then you had Annie Get Your Gun right after that.
Yeah, it was a one-off thing that we did in the studio. And that was once again a strange thing. Who was the producer on that?
It was Alan Tarney.
Yeah,
there you go.
Alan Tarney, who had just about the whole thing programmed up by the time we got to the studio. We turned up to record it and he pressed play and it just sort of, there it was, which wasn't Squeeze at all, really. But he did ask me, do you think, I still remember, he said, do you think you can go and play the drums along with that? Cheeky bastard. So I did. I just, on take and I did it, So it added a bit of life. And then Glenn did some guitar work on it. But yeah, it was Alan Tarney created that, really, that whole track, and it was very odd.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you guys have been around for so long and we're such a seasoned band that to have a producer come in and say, here's the track is that's sort of an odd thing to happen to you at that point.
It was very odd. But I thought, maybe it fed into our egos or Chris and Glenn's egos that somebody would take all that time and trouble to work on one of their songs, because they went for it, But there we go. It's all right,
What was the end of that band? Like that band broke up and then they did their Difford and Tilbrook record. How did that happen?
They just called a band meeting and said, we're breaking the band up. And I think there were, I don't know, you have to ask them for the actual reasons. But I think some of the reason was my drinking. Some of the reasons were Chris and Glenn believing some of the press stuff going on. Also the pressure of recording and touring and the disappointment of Sweet and a Stranger losing the sort of, maybe losing some of the Squeeze magic. And I think Chris and Glenn have been receiving offers, but, we have been living in each other's pockets for several years by then. So probably pleased to see the back of us in retrospect. There should have been a hiatus where we just went our separate ways for 6 months, 9 months, a year maybe, and then tried again. But I think Chris and Glenn were determined to have a shot of how do you say a solo career when it's a duo?
Right, a duo career.
A duo career. So I think they were determined to have a shot at that. But it didn't really work. They didn't get the sales they were hoping for. The name Difford and Tilbrook wasn't as recognisable as the name Squeeze, unfortunately for them. So it didn't really happen. I know it was a very good album. I mean, it was very competent and very well produced, but it was different.
Right.
So, and then, of course, after a year, I got sober, and Chris and Glenn, or Glenn phoned me up and asking me if I wanted to come and play with them again. So after a year of that stuff, of me driving a minicab in South London, Madison Square Garden, driving a minicab 2 weeks later. Anyway, there we go.
Wow.
Well, there we go. That's showbiz. No, that's alcoholism, actually.
But you got sober and took care of yourself during this time.
Well, yeah, I did get sober. I stopped drinking, thankfully. And so it all went up again. We had another hit record, whatever that was. What was it, Hourglass? And,
yeah,
and started touring again, going around the world, doing it all again. And I did it sober. The rest of the band, of course, was still living the rock and roll dream. But I was sitting up at the front of the tour bus with the driver, stone cold sober. Those were the days. Did that for 8 years.
So the reunited Squeeze had Jools back, and you back, and then Keith Wilkinson, so yet another new bassist who was the one who played on the Difford and Tilbrook record. And Cozy Fan Tutti Frutti, that album, which was produced by Laurie Latham, has definitely a more kind of like it doesn't sound like one of the pre-breakup records. It's much more electronic sounding. What was your thought on that when you were doing it?
Glenn had said by then that he was going to let go of the reins of steering Squeeze and take a back seat and just have as much say in the band as everybody else. And listen to the producer. And at that moment in time, Laurie Latham was one of the hot producers. He's just produced a couple of Paul Young hits, and he'd also produced Fine Young Cannibal hits, a couple of hits. So he was a relatively hot property, but it was difficult because he really worked piecemeal. You know, he worked one instrument at a time, tracking and double tracking and, breaking down drum beats to their individual drum hit. Really,
right?
Really, just not the sort of thing I was sort of used to. And also, he really affected the way I played the drums. He considered anything that I did that was slightly, I don't know if technical is the right word, but slightly, a bit more than boom splat, or basic, drum, that was anything more than that. He called it, stop doing those circus tricks, because he had an idea of what a pop record would sound like. So, so it was really different. And we were all tiptoeing around each other, that early days, we all wanted this to work and we were all sort of being as friendly as we could. And I was, not drinking and being sober. Unfortunately, just being sober for a year doesn't mean to say my attitude and thinking have particularly changed. I was still more or less the same person, just not drinking, which means I wasn't getting into so much trouble. I wasn't getting into fights, crashing cars and doing all the really crazy stuff and really, really crazy stuff. But I was still pretty confused emotionally and mentally, I was just going along with what anybody wanted, really. I was pleased not to be driving a mini cab and to be back sitting behind a drum kit, So, yeah. But, of course, there was a hit. We did have a hit with Hourglass.
Right, yeah. The next album, Babylon and On, then, which E.T. Thorngren produced with Glenn, And that one was more. Yeah, Hourglass is a great single. And Cozy Fan Tutti Frutti, I remember it coming out and I was really turned off by the sound of it because I just sort of liked things that sounded more organic and it sounded very processed to me. Yet it's actually an album I go back to more than I would have expected because I actually think the songs are very good and I've kind of gotten used to the other stuff. But something like King George Street is, as good as anything on any of those records.
It is. Well, forgive me for saying what you're thinking, but I think what's happened is that you've gone back to the songwriting,
right,
which has always been undeniable. What changed was the actual recordings. The way we played or gave voice to Chris and Glenn's songs, and I don't think we did them justice with Cozy. I think their songs were put through a strainer of technical mishmash of I don't know, maybe a producer being stamping too much of his own authority on
right.
what music is, rather than looking and hearing what Squeeze is and making the most of that. And I think that's where the problem was. It certainly the problem wasn't with the songs. The problem was with the production. So when you go back to it, I think you're hearing the songs and ignoring the production, which is probably a wise thing to do.
Right. And then you have Babylon and On and Frank. And basically those albums, those three albums have the basic core five of you. I think there's maybe an extra keyboardist that came in and out, but it seemed like it was actually sort of a stable period for you in that you had, you and Jools and Keith Wilkinson and Glenn and Chris. Like you hadn't actually had the same five people on two straight albums, never mind three straight albums up till that point.
That's true. Yeah. It was more stable. Maybe we were more mature and maybe we had a better idea of our place in the universe. Of course, as you can tell by what you just said, Glenn had once again seized the reins. His taking a backseat only lasted for that one album. And then once again, he was in control. And it was difficult. I mean, I think I was at times just hanging on because I wanted to still be in the music business. And then, of course, what happened was at the end of those three albums, my marriage broke up and I picked up a drink and I was immediately sacked again. So being sacked twice from the same band is pretty good achievement. But that's when I moved out of London, moved up to Lincolnshire, which is where I live now. I've been living here for over 30 years. Once again, I got sober, thankfully, a day at a time, after that particular slip. And that's when Jools and myself, the Rhythm and Blues Orchestra started with Jools and Gilson and went on to be what it is now. So I never did quit the music business. I'm still going and I'm still sober after 30 odd years now, 35 years or something. So yeah, now I really am a different person from that person.
I saw this show, I think it was on MTV, called Bands Reunited, where they were trying to reunite Squeeze sometime. And they finally found you and Jools, playing with the Rhythm and Blues Orchestra. And the two of you were like, yeah, no, thank you. And it was sort of the whole thing was about reuniting Squeeze. And then in the end, they're like, well, we didn't reunite Squeeze.
Oh, no. Well, if I remember, he burst into the rehearsal room, went up to Julian and said, we're the band's reunited. We're trying to get Squeeze together for a gig. How do you feel about it? And I think Julian said, well, is there any money in it? And he said, well, I don't think so. He said, well, no then. And then he looked at me and said, are you keen? And I said, I go where Julian goes. And
right.
That was it.
Would you all play together again if the circumstances were right?
Chris actually sits in with the Rhythm and Blues Orchestra quite regularly. In fact, he did that Albert Hall show that I was talking about. So he gets on stage and we do a couple of squeeze songs. We do Take Me Up North, Call for Cats, and maybe we'll do Up the Junction and things. Always goes down well. And when he does that, there's actually 3 original members of Squeeze on stage, which is more than there is when Squeeze is on stage, because then there's only 2.
That's true.
so
would you do it if Glenn and Chris said, "Hey, we just want to do this one last tour, the original 5 members or something like that," or I don't know what original 5 members those would be, but you would certainly be in whatever classic lineup there would be. Would you, if it was you and Jools, would you do it?
I probably would do it, but it never happened because firstly, Jools really doesn't need to do it. He's a very wealthy man that is now a British icon, that is one of the music godfathers of this country.
I love that show. It's a great show. He's done so much to expose all these bands, and the spirit of it is fantastic.
So why would he? He doesn't need it. If somebody was to wave a big checkbook at him, is Julian. Above all, he's a great musician and a even better businessman. So I'm sure he'd do it for money. But of course, so would I. So would all of us. But I don't think there's any chance of him doing it just for old time's sake. And that's one of the things. And the other thing is, I don't think I could physically do a Squeeze tour. I don't think physically I could do it because of my state of my lungs and my. Now with that, I can do 2-hour sets with Jools, but I know how to pace myself. But if I was going to try and create the vigor and excitement and drama of those early Squeeze recordings, I need a long lie down between each show, I promise you.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't like to half-heartedly do it. There'd be no point in doing it without making it the way it should be.
Well, I hope that post-COVID stuff clears up, because I know a lot of people. I'm doing a separate story for a magazine about sort of the long COVID effects, and it's
never going to change.
There's a lot that people don't understand about it at this point.
Well, it's permanent damage. It is actually permanent damage. I've lost quite a lot of use of my lungs.
I'm sorry.
No, there's other symptoms. I've got eurythmia, which is also left over from COVID. I've also got a strange throat. As you can hear, I don't sound I sound a bit more like a Dalek than a human being. And that's, once again, has been left over from COVID. I was in a pretty bad way, but everything else works all right, more or less.
I'm glad you made it. I'm glad you made it through, but that is pretty tough. I had it recently also, and I'm still a little hoarse from it as well. So it's, and I'd had all the vaxes and stuff. So, we just all have to move forward but I'm glad you're still drumming, and I'm glad you're still painting. And, you have a very quiet line of work and a very loud line of work. So those things would balance each other, I would think.
It's pretty good. Let me tell you this, Mark, I've been incredibly lucky to, I've just had, I think I've had 3, more than that, 4 different musical careers that all have been pretty successful. And a lot of people don't even have one. So, what have I got to complain about? Absolutely nothing. Good to meet you, Mark.
Nice meeting you. I've really loved your work, and I listened to it a lot. So I appreciate it. And I was excited that you said yes. And thank you so much for, spending all this time with me, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
That's it for episode 45 of Caropop. Thanks so much to Gilson Lavis for sharing his incredible history in music with us. You can see and order his paintings at gilsonlavisart.uk, and you can learn more about the Jools Holland Rhythm and Blues Orchestra at joolsholland.com. Then it's time for a deep dive into Lavis's squeeze work. I'd start with Cool for Cats and move forward through Argy Bargy, East Side Story, and yes, Sweets from a Stranger, though Black Coffee in Bed goes on too long. Of the post-reunion albums, I have a soft spot for Frank, as well as the first side of Cozy Fan Tutti Frutti, despite the synthetic 80s production. Caropop is produced by Chris Swake, who plays drums and is digging all these drummer guests. Another great one is coming soon. I'm Mark Caro. Please follow me on Twitter at Mark Caro, at MarkCaro, and visit the Caropop website, caropop.com, for posts about music, movies, and food, and also this Caropop podcast. Please share, subscribe, and tune in again next week for another Caropop conversation. Thanks.